Today I'm going to be talking about emotions. I'm going to suggest to you that emotions are one of the most powerful things that drive human behavior, and I want to understand whether or not I can help you to understand customer emotions better. And really, if I had to summarize one thing that drives my work, it's a really simple proposition, which is helping organizations to get out of the way of their staff, to get out of the way of their customers, and to let them get on with building you a better organization. The staff want a better place to work, the customers want a better place to buy for, and really all you are is in the way. Orchestrating that change is vitally important, and so I'm just going to talk today about 4 key things really. Number 1, the way we talk, the way we think, and the way we act. Number 2, we're going to talk about context, and context is a tremendously important thing. The third thing I want to talk about is what we're doing wrong today. Because we all do it, I do it as well, and then I'm going to give you some really quick examples of change, and at the end I'm going to give you 5 things you can actually go away and do something with tomorrow. So not much of a hill to climb, but the first hill I want to climb is that hill from 1 to 10, and I wonder, as you're sitting there listening to me, how many of you can think of 10 things that are actually perfect 10s? And the short answer is that probably none of you. I spoke recently at a conference and someone said that they had a 7-minute journey to work, and to him that was a perfect 10, but it was the only perfect 10 in his life. And the point is this, that when we are asking our customers to rate our services, we are asking them to rate us on a scale of 1 to 10. And so we're already asking them not only to do maths on our behalf, but also in some ways we're constructing a way of thinking that's alien to the way that we behave as people. Let's think about us as people. When I wake up in the morning, and I think, I'm okay. Or I'm slightly less than okay, I'm slightly better than okay, I am somewhere in relation to how I was yesterday. We think of our world in terms of it being okay-centered. And whether it's a little, it's a lot, it's very, it's more than, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. It's those verbs, it's those little statements that join sentences together that are actually how we understand all of the descriptive words in our language. Those can be numerically scored. And because they can be numerically scored, suddenly what you can do is you can come up with a different way of thinking about things that isn't 1 to 10, but is okay-centered. Now, if I was to ask everyone in the audience if they could think of 10 things that they thought were okay, or if they could think of 5 things that were slightly better than okay and 5 things that were slightly worse, again, you'd have a better shot at that than you would at asking 1 to 10. So 1 to 10 is actually wrong with the way that we think, and therefore maybe it doesn't have such an important role in the way we do business. But I'll come back to that. So I think that when you try and think about 10 things that are okay, or 10 things that are slightly better or slightly worse than okay, it's an awful lot easier than it is trying to think of things between the score of 1 and 10. So okay is, it's not just the way we think, it's actually a mathematical factor. So if you look at these 3 huts that I've put up here, the reality is that in each of these 3 spaces, things are okay most of the time in people's minds. A very interesting thing is that there's been work done that suggests that someone who's had a terrible physical accident and someone who's won the lottery both end up feeling the way they did before that event happens within about 18 months, and they feel no different to the way they did before. In other words, okay is where we return to. Okay is the fundamental part of what we think about the world. So I'm not going to bore you with the maths of this, but basically OK-centered maths is the maths of physics. It's Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and all of those wonderful, wonderful things described in the human condition by simply, yeah, it's all right, it's okay, it's a little better, it's a little worse. That's the way it works. So let's talk about that in a business context. Well, the reality is that sometimes things work and sometimes things don't. And this is really where the rubber meets the road when the phygital experience, when perhaps the thing you're expecting doesn't arrive, when the service you're expecting doesn't arrive, or when there's something wrong, that's when our experience suddenly needs some kind of support. And it's going to have to be very different support to what we get today. The conversation in which someone tells you at length that it's not going to get solved, and that's after they've taken a lot of information from you, is not going to be acceptable in the future. We're going to require a different approach to escalation. We're going to require a different approach to these things. And where does that difference in approach come from? It comes from context. So let's talk very briefly about context and context in escalation. One of the things that my work does show me is that over the next couple of years, the investment in AI is going to increase dramatically. And as a result, pretty much any kind of interaction is going to be both driven by or supported through some kind of AI application within the next couple of years. And whether you're talking to a bot as being your front interface, an app, or you're talking to an agent, behind that is going to be sitting some AI, and that's going to be part of your business decisioning systems. And that's going to create a new level of data, and I'm sure Jonathan and the guys are going to talk to you about that if they haven't already. But those additional layers of data are going to be vitally important as time moves forward. And when we talk about context, here is a classic example. This is one of my favorites. So there's the word sick, and there's the word sick as well. And what's wonderful is that if it's my youngest daughter saying something sick, that means that she's just seen an unbelievable film. If it's my mum talking about being sick, that means I've got to get on the motorway and I've got to get in my car because she is not well. The difference of context is in some ways that simple, but it's also a very complicated subject. But you will be pleased to know that through our research, what we've found is that context applies in at least 20 languages. So if we can score things using an OK-centered model, what we can do is we can build a context, and context is king. So let me give you an example of that. And let me just take you through very quickly the key elements of context as they are. So the first type of context there is core. And core is do not sell my information to Cambridge Analytica, do not beat up elderly doctors on your planes, pay your tax in Europe, and don't mention Brexit in the bar. It may be any of those, but it's the thing that makes us feel that we are in a relationship with you, that you're our kind of people and you're the sort of people we want to do business with. The next one is functional. Functional is tremendously important. A knife will cut, a glass will hold water, and of course, hopefully a speech will impart some information. Hopefully a conversation will be functionally useful to someone as well. But then there's also the exchange value. So 2 cars may be worth one boat, or a carving knife may be worth 3 spoons, or the exchange value of your conversation with someone has also a value. Sometimes in relationships, one person takes more from a relationship than another, and in those circumstances, the exchange value of that relationship is negative from one point of view. And whether it's that or whether it's the simple difference between 2 knives equaling 1 fork, exchange is a very important value. The next one is symbolic, and symbolic is just That's who gave me this thing. Why is it important to me? It may well be that I have pictures that my children drew for me when they were 6 years old that, you know, probably don't really look like me, but I still keep them. And organizations, they talk about their symbolic relationship with you. They talk about the value of their relationships with you. Certainly, we all remember when the banks said that they wanted to treat special people in an extra special way and that they were here for the journey. And of course, it is 10 years now since the financial crisis proved that they weren't actually here for all of the journey, all of the time. The final piece, of course, is something we call sign. It's the value of detail. And if you look around, and I wish I was in the room with you, but at the moment, I'm sure there's a room full of elegantly dressed people, all looking absolutely wonderful. And if you look around at yourselves, it's the difference between your shoes, it's the difference between your ties. It's certainly the difference between all of those different Mercedes out there that makes you decide whether or not you like them or not. Experience is made up of all of those things, and all of those things have a key role to play. Whoops, sorry. And so once you've got an OK-centered model, then what you're able to do is you're able to score all of these things in such a way that makes it simple to understand for anyone in your organization. As an ex-member of big business, my biggest challenge was someone would come to me and say the customer is angry. And what I want to know in 2 or 3 sentences at most is how angry. Because if you can't tell me how angry, you're not telling me anything at all. What you're telling me is I need to go and talk to a customer and find out for myself. So if you can start to build yourself a simple context-based model that says a customer is a little, a lot, is very, is too much, is whatever, suddenly you are using normal conversation in a normal way to describe customer situations. Because why do businesses get it wrong today? It's because we don't do exactly that. Look at the young man on the screen. Is this the moment to be explaining the terms and conditions to that young person? Is this the moment to be asking them for their account number, for their delivery number, for their bank details, or the 3rd letter of their password? I don't think it is. And I think that most people in this room will realize that this is not the moment for that. So when we think about voice of the customer, when we think about what's going on, we also actually need to think about the behavior of the customer as well. It's not just voice of the customer, it's the behavior that is so tremendously important. We all understand human behavior really well. We do it socially, we do it in our places of work, we do it in our families, we do that all of the time. But discussing it at work is a completely different thing. There we talk about things that we can't really put a handle on, like being a little more empathetic, or the 1 to 10 based scoring systems. These are not actionable. A little, a lot, too much and very, these are actionable. And that's the important thing. So when we think about what businesses do wrong today, the problem is that we do not discuss things in a simple enough way that we all understand the outcome. We end up with too many acronyms, too many different ways of expressing things, too many complex theories, rather than the customer liked this, didn't like this, didn't care about that, and wants us to do more of this better. I have probably described the truth of many people's situation in that simple phrase for a lot less money than it's taken them to find out the same answer. So just moving on very quickly, how did I come to this? Well, we started to look at voice of the customer in relation to scores. And what we found was some very interesting things was that the voice of the customer, what people said when they answered the questions, what people said didn't match what they actually put on or what they actually put on forms in terms of the scores. So with Trustpilot, the number one thing that people would say was, I wish I could give people 0 stars. And that seems to be a frequent occurrence there. With things like satisfaction, things like effort and things like Net Promoter, what we found was that the voice of the customer information simply didn't match up with what was being scored. And then we realized the first missing piece, and it's this: more than. More than happy, more than unhappy, more than able, more than satisfied, more than difficult. And once you start adding more than, suddenly you have more insight into the questions that your customers are asking you to respond to. For instance, there's a huge amount of stuff written in customer experience about giving people wow moments. I wish someone would give me a wow moment, but what I know is without a more than score, I could never tell an organisation that you've given me a more than moment. So just to be clear, when I talk about what we're doing wrong today, we may be trying to give people wow moments, but we're not recording them. And not only are we not recording them, we're also talking in a way that means that we're asking our customers to explain themselves mathematically in a system that they don't quite understand, rather than simply asking them to say, what did you think of this? And getting them to respond in a simple human way. So when we added our zero center to all of this, what we found was that we could make sense easily of what voice of the customer was without using scores. We could simply take the words and score them mathematically. So I'm just going to very quickly take you on a case study. This is courtesy of my friends at Sitel. It's a piece of work that we did on Waitrose and Partners. And Waitrose, as you know, is a tremendously well thought of brand. And what they allowed us to do was they allowed us to go into their contact center and start listening to phone calls. Now, the interesting thing about phone calls is that you can hear what's going on. You can literally hear the sentiment, you can hear the anger, you can hear what's going on more easily. But the same rules that apply to the contact center also apply to your digital channels. So whether or not it's a chat on with an agent, whether or not it's a chat bot, whether it's a piece of AI-driven communication, doesn't matter. But it happens that contact centers are really easy to do. Because you can start out in a contact center by saying, does this customer sound angry? And if they do sound angry, then maybe there's something we should do about that. So what we did for Waitrose was we looked at about 120 different things. There's a huge number of them there. You'll be able to look at those in a little more detail when you get the pack. And then we'd start to focus in. So this is almost like high-speed photography. This is slow motion for experiences, where we look at things like emotional baggage. We look at the amount of time between different parts of a conversation. We look at the ums and the ahs. We look at the whats, and we start to hear what's going on. And in order to give you an example of that, here's possibly what a beginning of a conversation might be. And no, this isn't from Waitrose, I made this one up. But basically I'm sitting there thinking, my time is passing. I want to tell you what's important to me. My priority is important to me. And I don't want, if my call's important, answer it. Yeah, do not have me listening to the same piece of music over and over again, and do not repeat your messages. I can't stress that to you enough. If you repeat your message 3 times in a row, your customer is 5 times more likely to leave the conversation. Anyway, so there's a lot of things going on for the agent. There's a lot of things going on for the customer. And we call that baggage, and I'll come back to baggage in a little while. And then what we're also able to do is we're also able to throw it at a bit of AI. This is us playing with Watson, and it shows us common words that get used a lot, so we can see how the customer talks versus how the agents talk. And again, that's a way of saving money. If we talk like the customers, our conversations will be shorter. If we take the emotional baggage that customers have, then our conversations will be shorter, and I'll speak to that briefly at the end. So now what I'm just going to talk about is I'm just going to talk about best and worst practice. Now, I'm an expert in customer experience, as is everybody else in the room, because you're all customers. But what I can tell you is that your staff and your customers know more about what's good and bad in terms of your performance than you do. So what we do is we get the customer, our client, to start thinking about what does good and what does bad look like, and therefore they start to work out what is the best practice they want to make more of and what is the worst practice they want to get rid of. The important thing there is if it's done in the right way, it's a non-blame culture, it becomes part of fun, it becomes part of a daily habit of improvement. So the practical point of view is that there are two main arcs. I know there's a lot on here, but I've covered them all. Basically, there is the functional arc, this orange sort of line here. It may well be that I can get exactly what I wanted out of the conversation and still feel completely dissatisfied by it. I know that that happens in a lot of cases, and certainly that happens to me more often than I'm happy with. And then there are times when I walk into a shop and they can't give me what I want, or I phone someone, they can't give me what I want, but they're so nice about it and they're so helpful that I think the next time I'm going to do business, I'm going to do business with that person. So from a practical point of view, understanding whether or not you're giving an emotionally good experience, a functionally good experience, a good exchange, and all of those pieces. If you're looking at your experience through the eyes of your staff and customer and simply playing the best elements of those, suddenly you've got an approach to change that's an absolute winner. So the outcomes for Waitrose, really the most important things that we did was we identified a way of looking at best and worst practice. That means that they're on a path now that they started then, and they will continue probably ad infinitum, because they will always be looking to improve. They will always be looking to compete in the challenging market. Obviously, we identified some things for them very quickly that were useful, but we compared their different channels. And for Waitrose, that was a really important thing. The telephone experience does not match the in-store experience, was the feedback that we got from the client. And so they said, this is not okay, we're going to change that. And within a few days of starting to make those changes, customers were saying, this is like talking to a partner in a store. So something really simple, really straightforward was identified that made customers feel better and made the agents feel better as well. Again, does that sound like common sense? Well, it is, because it is. So just to finish off, before I get to the end, there's always going to be a bad guy in the story, and here is the villain of the piece from your point of view. It's Amazon. Amazon is built around habits. It's built around understanding your habits and understanding the emotional role of your habits. And if your organization isn't thinking about itself as part of the habits of your life, it's not doing what Amazon is doing today. And that's a real challenge for you. So finally, I just want to talk briefly about a survey that we did. So we wanted to interview the people of Dublin. We wanted to find out what they thought about Dublin Bus. And so we created we created a chatbot, and this is Charlie the chatbot, and he would engage you in a conversation. And although it was programmed, it wasn't really AI. We gave it the feel of AI. He made a few jokes and various things along the way. And by understanding context and understanding context properly, what we were able to do was to get 70% of the people to complete. The average person spent 11.5 minutes doing our little experience. They didn't think they were doing a survey for 11.5 minutes. They thought they were having an experience. So simply by thinking about people as people, thinking about them more as in the way that we do socially, we were able to leverage that in terms of doing things like using a bot to find out that what people thought about Dublin Bus was they do a pretty good job of running a bus service. So I guess I just want to bring this to an end very briefly by saying, don't think about the voice of the customer. It's only 7% of what the customer is saying to you. Those crossed arms, those people, are sitting there ignoring your surveys, those people are talking to you as eloquently as if they were quoting Shakespeare. Yeah. You need to be able to understand voice of the customer, but you need to be able to understand behavior of the customer with the same discipline. It's not a separate thing. Okay, so I'm a great believer in ending with some practical things you can do, and I'm going to end with the following 5 main pieces. The first one is find a better way to talk about your customers and to your customers. A little, a lot, very, too much. These are simple things that we understand, and they're a hell of a lot easier to understand than the difference between 8 or 9 or 10 on a scale. Use words because they work. The second thing is ask questions as you go through the experience. That's a really important thing. Instead of having post-experience surveys, why don't you actually ask questions so you can fix the experiences as you go? The third thing is be aware of the emotional baggage and carry it for the customer. If I tell you I've been a customer for 6 years and I've spent X thousand pounds with you, then if you don't acknowledge that, then I'm going to beat you over the head with that again in 5 minutes' time and in 10 minutes' time when I'm really, really angry. If I am angry, then everything that you leave me to be angry with, I'm going to waste your time listening to again and again. Finally, I guess there are 2 things. The first is this. I started out with a quote, get out of the way of your customers and your staff and they'll build you a better business. And I mean that. That is a vital job of management. And I speak as someone who's been in big business management for most of my working life. I know you won't believe I'm older than 21, but in fact, getting out of the way of your staff and customers is really, really important. And then the final piece is this. Listen to what your customers are saying when they're actually talking in real language. Think about what you're talking about as a business. Because I see an awful lot of stuff that says 71% of IT directors think that this is going to be the most important thing in 2019, or that 65% of customers say that X is what they most want, or that they'd prefer to deal with a human under certain circumstances. That's only because they've never met a better robot. No one would have voted for the ATM as being a way to deal with a bank years ago. So as Henry Ford said, if I'd have asked the customers what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses. You need to think about innovation as part of the way that you do business every day. And with that, I'm going to hand you back. Thank you.